Hello and welcome back to the Just As I Am podcast. It is your friend Nicole, and today we are going to be talking about some special miracles. We are going to be talking about times when Jesus healed others. So stay tuned. Have you ever been to the doctor? Whether it's lately or in general, was there something wrong that you needed fixed? You were sick and you needed healing, or you had a broken bone and you needed healing. You just had a purpose for going to the doctor, right? Well, today we are going to talk about the times that Jesus was a healer. Now, in all reality, there is not enough time for us to discuss the hundreds upon thousands of people and moments that he healed. So, for now, we are just going to go over 10, and if you want to hear more, then we can go over some more later. But Jesus healed people from all different types of things. He healed people from blindness to the mute to the disabled and even from death. And each of these typically happened in a different way. Some of them might have been similar, but they all had their special qualities about them. So how about we start in order and go from there? So we're going to go starting at number 10. Starting at number 10, we have a man who had been blind since birth. Jesus was passing by when his disciples asked him who had sinned to make him blind. Did the man sin or did his parents sin? What was the purpose of him being blind? And Jesus responded saying, neither. The man didn't sin, nor did his parents. And that this happened to him so that God's work could be displayed, ending with how he himself, Jesus, is the light of the world. And we can probably all say what happens next, but I'll say it anyways. Jesus spits on the dirt, spits on the ground, mixes it together, he makes some mud, he smears the mud on the man's eyes, and then he tells the man to go wash it all off, to go wash his face in the pool of Siloam. Well, he followed Jesus' directions, and on his way back, the man was able to see. At the end of each story, I'm going to try to give you the section of the Bible, the chapter and verses in which I pulled this from. So if you want to go back to read more in depth, because I'm really just kind of skimming the top on some of these, but some of these I will be giving more in depth because they're not as detailed, I guess. But you can go to John 9, 1 through 7 to read this whole story. Now, our next moment at number 9 is about a man who was blind and mute. So this man could not see, nor could he speak. But get this, he was also demon-possessed. This one is pretty simple. He was brought to Jesus and was healed. That's about it. He was now able to see and speak, and per usual, you can see in this story that the Pharisees were not happy with that. You can find this story in Matthew chapter 12, starting in verse 22. Now, number 8 brings us someone who was not only blind, but also disabled. And you're probably thinking, Nicole, isn't being blind being disabled? Well, let's just get into it, okay? So this actually happened on Palm Sunday when Jesus was riding down from the Mount of Olives, okay? And, most of the time when Jesus was popping up anywhere, he was the guy. Everybody wanted to come see him. Everybody knew what he was capable of and wanted him to put his capabilities to use for them. So Jesus is on his donkey coming down from the Mount of Olives, and many of the people came to be healed, and they were. Literally, it's one verse. That's just about exactly what it says. And you can find that in Matthew chapter 21, verse 14. Now, for number 7, we have someone who is deaf and mute. Again, this comes right after Jesus casted out a demon from a girl. So if you want to kind of backtrack just a pinch, you can go back and read that. But it goes from that to this. And so here, Jesus was traveling through, I didn't look these up, Decapolis? Maybe? And he was brought a deaf man who had a speech impediment, essentially. And he begged for Jesus to lay a hand on him. Now, when we say lay a hand, we're not talking about give him the beat down. We're talking about, the touching and being healed, okay? So Jesus is just minding his business, and these people bring this man who cannot speak clearly. He can't, enunciate his words, and he can't hear. Which, if he couldn't hear how words were said, how could he be able to enunciate them? That's just my thinking. But anyways, so what does Jesus do to this man? He takes him, and he takes him in private. He wants this to be a moment between them, okay? And what does he do? He sticks his fingers in the man's ears. Yes, in his ears. Which is understandable, but it's kind of silly. But, you do you. This is how he healed the man, so I'm going to go with it. Makes sense. He stuck his fingers in his ears, and then he touched his tongue, and then they looked up to heaven, saying, "Be opened." I'm not even going to try to say the Hebrew word for that. And the man could hear and speak clearly. So you can read this story in Mark 7:32 through 35, and then you can just kind of backtrack just a little bit to hear about how Jesus kind of was an exorcist to this little girl. I guess it was a girl. It says girl. Now, number 6 talks about Abraham's daughter. And no, we're not talking about Father Abraham and his many sons here. This is a different one. That was too far long ago. So number 6 talks about Abraham's daughter who is disabled by a spirit. It doesn't really give much backstory on how a spirit made her disabled. It doesn't say for how long. It just says that she was disabled by a spirit. She was not able to straighten her back. So in my mind, I was like, osteoporosis, right? Is that when people have problems with their back? But she had problems with her back for 18 years. She could not sit up straight for anything. And when Jesus saw her, he called her and said, "You are free from your disability." Then he laid his hands on her, and she straightened up and glorified God. Amen, because I sure would have done the same thing, sis. I would have been so grateful. And you can find this in Luke chapter 13, verses 10 through 13. And for a little razzle-dazzle, I know I had a list, but the next two, or was it three? Anyways, the next couple of these are going to be about people who were sick. Now, number 5, in here we find a case of leprosy, and I'm sure you've heard this story before. If you have not, welcome. Now, Jesus was passing through Jerusalem, through Samaria and Galilee, and as he entered a village, this village had 10 men who had leprosy. Okay, and if you know anything about leprosy, I was kind of looking it up. I want to say it's kind of like, it's a skin thing. And essentially, I'm pretty sure it's when you get flaky, but leprosy was contagious, and they could not figure out back then how to heal somebody of it. They couldn't figure out how to heal somebody of leprosy. And so essentially, if you had leprosy, you were kind of an outcast. You had to stay away from everyone. So, let's see, according to the internet, because I didn't do my research beforehand, leprosy is a chronic bacterial infection affecting skin, nerves, eyes, and the lining of the nose, causing skin patches, nerve damage, and numbness. Now, in today's time, we have medicine for that, but back then, obviously, they did not have a pharmacy, and they could not just go and get the fix. So, leprosy, I really want to, and I do not have eczema, but that's just kind of what comes to my mind, is when, people with eczema, their skin is just so dry and itchy. But there was 10 of these men, and they saw Jesus, and they asked him to have mercy on them. And Jesus, being Jesus, he told them to go show themselves to the priests. And while on their way to go show themselves to the priest, they became cleansed. And I wonder if it was, it's like the movies, like in Transformers, okay. We've all seen The Lion King, right? It's like that scene where Simba is a cub, and then he transforms into like a preteen, and then he's a teenager, and then he's an adult. Was it like that, or was it instantaneous? These are things that I just would love to know. But on their way to the priest, their skin was cleansed. They were healed. They had no signs of leprosy whatsoever. But the kicker is that out of those 10 men, only one of them came back to give thanks. He was so grateful. He came back and thanked Jesus and praised God and all the things. You can find this story in Luke 17, verse 11 through 19, I believe. And for number 4, we have a family member with a fever. The family member happens to be Simon's mother-in-law. So one of the disciples, Simon, remember we talked about him before, his mother-in-law had a terrible fever. Now, we do not know how long. We do not know, how high. We don't know any details. We just know that she was sick with a fever. Well, Simon and Jesus, along with 3 other disciples, went to Simon's home. His mother-in-law had a fever, and they showed her to Jesus. Well, Jesus took her by the hands, stood her up, and then the fever was gone. Simple as that. She then began to serve them. So obviously she was feeling much better at this point. You can find this In Mark chapter 1, verses 29 through 34, for number 3, we have a centurion who had a servant essentially on his deathbed. He also had a fever. He was sick. The centurion sent some Jewish elders to Jesus, pleading that he was worthy to grant the request of saving the servant. The centurion didn't believe that he was worthy enough. He didn't feel like he was good enough to go to Jesus himself to ask for help to save his servant, but he felt that his servant was worthy of being saved. And he pleaded with Jesus to save his servant. Jesus was amazed at this man's faithfulness and said that he had not found so great a faith in Israel. Or that there wasn't, I guess. When they went back, the servant was all better. All of his boo-boos were gone. You can find this story in Luke 7, 11 through 17. At number 2, second to last, we have someone whose daughter had died. This dad found Jesus in the synagogue and fell at his feet and begged and begged and begged him to come heal his dying 12-year-old daughter. Did she have a fever as well? I would assume so, but I'm not 100%. Anyways, daughter was very sick, was on her deathbed. This dad, as a good dad would, went to go find Jesus and begged him for mercy and to save his daughter. Well, side note, during the middle of this story, and this is an iconic moment, this is a staple, you see a lot of references towards this, but all the while that this was happening, a lady who had been bleeding for 12 years, how her body made enough blood for her to be able to bleed for 12 years, I have no idea, but she did. She succeeded in that. She came and touched the hem of Jesus's garment and was healed. So when you hear that, grab the hem of his garment, as long as you're holding on to the hem of his garment, this is what we're referencing. So anyways, so the woman was healed. She was very thankful. She was praising. She was just amazed. But we get back to the father, and while that happened, while the woman had grabbed the hem of his garment, this other person comes up to the dad and he says, "Your daughter is dead. Leave the teacher alone, or don't bother him anymore." It would have been very hard for me not to throw hands. I would have laid the smack down and then just, while Jesus was there, ask for forgiveness. That just, to me, that was unacceptable, an unacceptable behavior, but it is what it is. So from there, we are so very thankful that Jesus had his listening ears on, because he was listening, and after he heard that, he told the dad, he said, "Don't be afraid. Only believe and she will be saved." Well, they go to his house, okay? And only the disciples that were with Jesus, and I would have to go look back and see how many it was. It wasn't all 12 of them, but it was a good handful of them. Only the disciples that were with Jesus went to the house, and the girl's parents. So Jesus, disciples, mom and dad, only people in the house, nobody else. And Jesus kind of gets a little sassy, I'm not gonna lie. And he tells them to stop mourning. I guess they get in the house and the parents are just wailing. They are giving it a go. And he says, "Quit. Like, stop. She's only asleep." That's what Jesus tells them, that she's only asleep. He grabbed her hands, told her to get up, and so she did. So both of those stories you can find in Luke chapter 8, I believe 40 through 56 includes both of those, because like I said, the second story is literally in the midst of that main story. Go read it for yourself. Absolutely. Now for number 1, we've got a widow. Actually, can we go back just for a second? Because I forgot that I wanted to bring this up. This story, okay, between this story and the one of Simon's mother-in-law made me think of Dorcas. And we've talked about Dorcas before. Very lightly have we talked about Dorcas before. I believe, and I could be getting this wrong, I believe her other name that she's known by is Tabitha, but I just think Dorcas is iconic, so we're just going to stick with Dorcas. But Dorcas, if you remember, Dorcas did so many things for the community. She loved and she was a follower of Christ, and she got sick and she died. And I really was trying to remember who came and healed her. And I really want to say it wasn't Jesus, but I could be wrong. But let's find out. Peter. Peter raised Dorcas from the dead. Now that is another thing. So many, and we are so sidetracked, but you know what? Fine. So many others had healing powers in the Bible. Peter, Paul, so many. So maybe we should do that next. What do you think? These were what Jesus did, but maybe we should go back and see what the others did. Anyways, I digress, but that's just what that made me think of. It made me think of Dorcas. And yes, her other name was Tabitha, but Dorcas is so much more iconic. Anyways, coming in number 1 is a widow whose only son just died, and they are literally carrying him out of the city gates. Pallbearer's casket and all, when Jesus walks by. Okay, Jesus saw her and told her not to weep. Gentle Jesus. Jesus came, touched the coffin, all the pallbearers, and the widow, and then told the man to get up. Now, when we think of coffins, when you say coffin, I think of like Dracula and like the pointy hexagonic type of casket. But then I also have the picture of a wooden casket in my head. So I don't know if theirs had lids on them. I don't know, because like, did he just knock and come out? Anyways, so many thoughts. But Jesus knocked on the coffin and told the man to get up. And well, he sure did. He rose, and after he did that, everyone freaked out, as they should. And then they started to glorify God. I mean, my bestie is back. My son is back. Just crazy, but so thankful. And you can go read more about that in Luke chapter 7, 11 through 17. And I'm in a giving mood, so why don't we do a bonus one? And I will give you about 3 seconds to guess which one I am thinking of that we should go over before our time is up. If you guessed Lazarus, you were correct. Pat yourself on the back. So we've got Mary and Martha's brother. Now we know a little bit about Mary and Martha, right? Do we? Do you remember Mary and Martha? When Jesus went to their house and one was worried about preparing everything and the other was pouring her perfume on his feet? That Mary and Martha. Not Mama Mary. Not Mary Magdalene, but the other Mary. You know. Well, we've got Mary and Martha's brother Lazarus, who has become very sick and doing what anyone else would do with the people that they know. They sent a messenger to go tell Jesus. So Jesus loved his friends. I mean, besties for life. Deeply cared about these people. And he knew that this was going to have a purpose. Okay? Lazarus, his illness, and eventually his death is going to have a purpose. And so, instead of rushing back, as one would, your bestie is in trouble, let me go fix this, he takes an extra 2 days. He stays where he's at for another 2 days, and then he heads back to go see Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. Well, Jesus knew that Lazarus had passed away. I mean, he already knew that he was going to die, and that he did. And he still returned to the sisters. And the disciples were a little nervous because Jesus had just come from there. They all had just come from there. And they were worried that they were going to try to kill him again, because when they were just there, they tried to stone Jesus. And so they were kind of a little skeptical, on edge, but Jesus was like, I'm going. And so all the disciples were like, well, if he goes, we go. We're going to die with him, because you know the disciples and their mindsets that they had. But this is a good sentiment. So when Jesus had gotten there, he learned that Lazarus had been in the tomb for 4 days. And one thing to know is that, well, let me actually hold off on that for a second. But this had the sisters torn up, okay? I mean, even if you're looking for the shortest verse in the Bible, it is in this section, and that is Jesus wept. We got Jesus crying. He's all heartbroken, just like the sisters. Got me weeping. Well, Lazarus had been in the tomb for 4 days. And like I said before, Jesus knew that this was going to have a purpose. The purpose was, back then, because, like we've discussed before, the medical world was not anywhere near what it is today. And they decided that you were officially dead after 3 days. Okay? 3 days. The Bible has a lot of specific numbers that have a lot of detail behind them. And so, Jesus needed Lazarus to be dead for 3 days. Jesus was dead for 3 days. They knew for sure that you had passed away after 3 days. That was their science. Well, Jesus goes and, he's saying once again, he's going over the purpose of this whole happening and whatnot. And Jesus tells them that he is the resurrection. If you believe in the resurrection of life, then you'll be resurrected. I'm botching this, so go back and read it. But anyways, Jesus is telling them that they believe in the resurrection and he is the resurrection of life. That is what he's telling them. So he said, if you believe in me, then this is what's going to happen. And of course they do, because they are followers of him. They are Christians. And Jesus tells them to remove the stone, and then one of the sisters is like, Jesus, it's been 4 days. It's not going to smell good. It's been 4 days. Because they also did not have the embalming type medicine that we have today. So they were a little weary of that, but Jesus was like, just roll the stone away. It's fine. So they rolled the stone away. Jesus prayed, and then essentially he hollered, Lazarus, come out. And so he came, still wrapped up in all of his cloth and linen and all the things, walked right up out of that tomb. And you can find this because I botched some of it so well. You can go back and read it in John 11:17 through 44. Yes, John chapter 11, verses 17 through 44. You can go back and you can read it, and then you can see where I missed something or where I just got it all mixed up and backwards and what have you. But I'm so glad that we got to get together and discuss this, because we have just in our prayer request, well, I don't know about yours, but in mine, in my prayer request world, I've had a lot of prayers, requests for healing of people, whether it's, hearts, or from sickness, or from some kind of physical or emotional brokenness. And it just occurred to me one day, I was like, or was it because I was doing a word search or a crossword puzzle? It was a crossword puzzle. And it was saying something about Jesus healed something, something, something. And I was like, you know what? Let's talk about those. So we talked about 10 plus a bonus, 11 times that Jesus healed someone or a group of people, because he's good like that. So I hope that if you in your world need some kind of healing, that you look up to the ultimate healer, the resurrection of life, and that he gives it to you, or to those in which you are asking for it. Don't forget to grab the hem of his garment. I will talk to y'all later. Bye.